I've got a question. One that I wanted to ask you last time, but we didn't have time to get to it. And one that really piggybacks off what you were just talking about, how there's different ways to explore the world. One of them being reading. And I think that's one very, very important and timeless way of exploring the world. What do you think about this phenomenon? Less people are reading. Like, it feels like almost nobody is reading per capita. What do you make of that? Do you see that as an existential crisis?
No.
What do you make of it?
No. Well, reading for pleasure has always been a minority occupation. Like, most people don't read for pleasure. Of the people who read for pleasure, only a small proportion buy books. Of the people who buy books, only a small proportion buy difficult books. It's a specialty market, and I don't think that's changing. What I do see happening, though, is that is being expanded in surprising ways by such things as YouTube videos and podcasts.
So you can find the value in something like that is just as valuable as something you could possibly find in a book.
Well, I think that the two technologies have their advantages and disadvantages. The thing about a book that you can't get from a discussion is that a book is like a portrait as opposed to a photograph. A photograph, it's click, that's that. A portrait you layer on and layer on and layer on and work over for weeks. You still have the same single image, but there's this depth to it. And a book enables you to think and then rethink and think and then rethink. And so you can go deeper in a book than you can, I would say, in any other medium. Okay. But that doesn't mean you can't go deep in a podcast. And it doesn't mean that there's no educational utility in podcasts. Plus, there's audiobooks, right? And
Sure.
people are listening to those
that
like mad.
was another question. Do you think that audiobooks are just as valuable as books?
Oh, sure.
Just as good?
Well, the thing is, if you can really read, you can read way faster than you can listen. So reading is more effective, except that, and this is what's cool about podcasts and what's game-changing about them, I would say, is we can't read while you're driving.
Yeah.
You can't read while you're doing the dishes or exercising. And so all of a sudden with the podcast world, people have all this time that was used maybe listening to music, which is fine, right? But lots of people now are listening to like difficult podcasts.
Yeah, educational ones.
Yes, and long, detailed discussions about political issues that was never possible with television or even with radio for that matter. So, and people say, well, young people have a fragmented attention span. It's like, well, yeah, but Joe Rogan does 3-hour podcasts, and those do just fine. And your podcast is how long usually?
It's pretty long, 2 hours. Generally.
Yeah. Right. So that's not for a fragmented attention.
Sure.
So no, I think it's good.
You're absolutely right. I think the number one person who listens to this podcast and podcasts in general are people who are occupied doing something else.
Yep.
And I think you're right. That's really valuable to be able to utilize that space.
Definitely. It's found time. Right. And so that's why the podcast market, I think, has exploded. It's like, oh, look, I can make use of commuters. People spend thousands of dollars a month in their time commuting. It's like, poof, all of a sudden you can make that. You can take a university degree while you're commuting, essentially, in terms of the knowledge that you can attain. Sure. So I'm not pessimistic about that at all.
And also the way that you have been using YouTube with your content is kind of amazing.
It's
the way that there's hundreds of thousands of views on your lectures and
and they're difficult. They're difficult lectures. Like they push me when I'm lecturing, and they're long. That's right. And there's a big market for high quality educational material. So, or demanding educational material, let's say.
One of the brilliant things you've done is you market yourself really well, and to the new media, I think, where your contemporaries weren't doing that.
Right.
And so you really broke new ground with that. And I mean, it's paid dividends for you, obviously.
Yeah, well, it's part of my insane curiosity, and I've always learned, it's this same thing we were talking about 10 minutes ago. It's like, I've done a lot of different things in my life, and I've always felt like a complete idiot when I started doing them, because that's why Carl Jung said, for example, that the fool is the precursor to the savior. You have to be willing to be a fool to advance, because when you first move in your new direction, what the hell do you know? You're just a bumbling dimwit, but you won't be that for long. That's the thing. Whereas if you stay in your little safe place, your little safe space, let's say, then, something will get you sooner or later. You can bloody well be sure of that. But temporarily you're safe. Well, that's not helpful. And so when I started, It started when I started talking to journalists. They would phone me and I would talk to them. And most of my colleagues they'd usually say something dismissive about journalists, like, well, they always get it wrong. It's like, well, first of all, there's no they. And what makes you think you're important enough to pay attention to anyways? And if they get it wrong, maybe it's because you didn't explain it very well. And the journalists would call and I'd talk to them. And well, then they'd offer me an opportunity. So I got an opportunity to go on a TV show. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll go do that. And so I did that and it worked pretty well. And then I got an opportunity to do some more. And then I was on a regular on a TV panel news show in Ontario. And then I got this little 13-part series that they made out of my courses and started doing public lectures, and those all worked. And then I thought, oh, well, what the hell would happen if I put these on YouTube? There seems to be a market for them. But it was pretty amateurish.
You think that whole journey started by just taking the call from that first journalist?
Oh, sure. But taking it in a particular way. It was the same way that we're having this conversation. I thought, well, a journalist has a question. I'm not doing anything expedient. I'm not saying, well, I'm hoping that something will come of this. I didn't have a specified goal in mind. I thought, let's have a conversation
And let
the chips fall where they will. Yeah. And so, and one of the things that distinguishes me, I would say, from many of my colleagues, and perhaps from many people, is that generally when someone comes along and says, well, would you like to do this? I'd say, okay, let's give it a try. And I don't expect that I'm going to be particularly good at it how would I be? I'm certainly not as good at it as I'm going to be, that's for sure.
Right.
Because obviously when you first start something, you're just not that good at it. But, I felt like a fool when I first started to practice as a therapist, or when I first started to lecture, when I first started to work as a business consultant, when I was designing software, when I was going on, starting to do media events. It's like, what the hell do I know? I don't know how to do this. It's like, whatever, man. It's like, move ahead.
Or when you first uploaded to YouTube? Did you?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the channel kind of limped along for a while. I mean, it depends on how you measure it. But, I mean, when I really sat up and paid attention was in April 2016, the views hit the 1 million mark. And I thought, million, eh? What does that mean? And I really thought about it. I thought, 1 million's a lot. If I sold 1 million books, it's like, well, that's when you do the little touchdown dance, right? At the end of the field, because that just doesn't happen. And I'd never write a scientific paper that had 1 million views. That just never happens, ever, not once, right? Then you think, well, if you talk to 50 stadiums full of 20,000 people, you'd think that's noticeable, right? That's noticeable.
Yeah.
I thought, 1 million. And people were watching the lectures, like their long lectures. They were watching them. It wasn't just 30 seconds. They were in there. Like some people would browse and pop out, but lots of them were watching them right to the end. And so I thought, all right, what the hell is this YouTube thing? Anyways, what is this? It's not cute cat videos. It's, and then I thought, oh, I get it. I see what it is. It's like the invention of the printing press. It's that big. For the first time in human history, the spoken word has as large a reach and as long a duration as a book.
Right.
That's never happened, period.
It's a great
ever.
analogy.
It's amazing. And then that just blew me away. I thought, oh, this is a Gutenberg revolution. This is a big deal.
This video is made possible by Audible. Start your free trial today using the link below and listen to audiobooks from intellectuals around the world.